Hello and welcome to Calmversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's episode is actually a switcheroo. I was in London in February of 2025 and had the chance or the opportunity to visit the Lotus Eaters studio and was interviewed by Beau Dade, who is also known as History Bro. He's been on my channel a few times. We go really deep into various American historical topics. And in this conversation, he actually interviews me, or we actually have more of a discourse about my work and the history of the United Kingdom and what happened at the ARC conference and a variety of topics. Lotus Eaters were kind enough to let me repost this interview. They have a wonderful set and I was all dressed up, so it's kind of a nice treat to be able to share this with my audience. You guys very definitely should, if you haven't already, check out the Lotus Eaters content. They cover a wide variety of topics and they're all stellar, sterling individuals. Without further ado, here is myself and Beau Dade.
Hello and welcome to this very special interview where it is my pleasure to be speaking to Mr. Benjamin A. Boyce. How are you, sir?
Very good, Beau. How are you doing?
Fine, yeah. Mr. Calmversationist, the voice of reason.
Well, here we are. I made it out to London and you were very generous to offer me a trip to Swindon. Well, I mean, you invited me to Swindon. I paid for it myself. Quite a town you
We'll
got
reimburse you for that. We can do that.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay.
We can, certainly.
I'll do a write-off on my tax.
We will. The trains are stupidly expensive.
What's up with
stupid.
that? Well, at least they're on
It's a long
time.
story. It's just a long story. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
You can literally get a flight to Turkey for the price it costs to go to London or Nottingham or something. It's stupid.
Yeah.
But thanks for coming in.
Absolutely.
Really, really appreciate it. And if anyone doesn't know, we've made a fair few bits of content over the years. What, 4 or 5 different long-form bits?
Probably 4. We've been going through various aspects of American history. We did the War of 1812. We've done Jefferson.
Hamilton.
And Ulysses S. Grant.
That's right.
So far. And I'm hoping to get the Progressive era if you ever want to do something on what led up to pre-Franklin Roosevelt and how... or whatever else you're interested in. It's always deep, beautiful dives that you bring to the channel.
Thank you. You flatter me, sir. No, anything you want to do, where if there's any particular thing you're interested in, whatever it is, you know, like Daniel Boone, the Hiroshima thing, the Nixon tapes, whatever you want.
Okay.
I'm there for it. If you're interested in sort of the pre-war 30s, Roosevelt stuff,
I think it'd be really interesting. I think that what we're experiencing being dismantled right now was put in motion by the Progressive era. Like what Trump is breaking apart was solidified by FDR, but it was put in motion by the Progressive era, by the academics, the experts, the rule of the experts kind of thing in government, in the U.S. government. And I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but with America withdrawing its soft power from Europe, I'm wondering how, if Europe's going to be able to correct itself from certain aspects of the Progressive era that you guys are experiencing with massive immigration, multiculturalism, left-wing media that apparently is mostly funded by us. So...
With Trump 2.0, it's now pretty apparent that we, Europe and Britain, particularly Britain, are just way behind the curve now.
Well, you guys have a direction to go in, I guess. It's possible, maybe.
Yeah. And I'll take that. Well, let's see. Hopefully, maybe if Le Pen can get in France, AfD can get in Germany, if we can get Reform or even someone more right than them, fingers crossed. Hopefully Trump, and if it's sort of advanced presidency after that, hopefully they can sort of show us something to aim towards.
Yeah.
I'm hoping, you know.
Is Reform just kind of the conservative coalition? Do you think that are they particularly strong? I was just at this ARC conference, which was kind of a big tent, conservative, classical liberal-ish, umbrella. And there wasn't anybody making really strong statements. There was no real leadership there. There was a couple of kooky ideas, and kind of Farage was there. He was interviewed by Jordan Peterson, but he was very political on what he would say and what he wouldn't say. So I'm wondering if you guys have any blustery Trump-ish, king-like personalities that might...
Not really. There are parties that are ever so slightly more conservative or right-leaning than Reform. There's like the English Democrats, there's UKIP, there's the Homeland Party. There are some, but they're sort of small outfits.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you're aware of my history with reform.
Oh, no.
So I might be might not be the best person in the world to ask, because I'm going to have to give you quite a personal take on it. But for me, they're not anywhere near strong enough. But that's just my take. They are still going to be way better than a Starmer government.
Yeah,
of course,
okay, yeah.
Of course they are.
Yeah.
But for me, they're not strong. Like you say, then some people in the party are right. Like Rupert Lowe is good, but I don't think, personally, I don't think Nigel Farage and Richard Tice's leadership is strong enough, or their rhetoric is strong enough. For example, Nigel was asked very specifically about remigration.
Which is deportation?
Yeah.
Why did they invent a new word for that? Maybe it's an older
Well,
word.
it's not a new word.
Okay.
It's just another word for the same thing.
Yeah.
And he essentially just said, no, we can't do that. It's politically impossible.
Huh.
And
who knows what's politically possible and impossible?
Yeah. No, historically, the forced mass movements of people is very, very common. In fact, happens all the time. Pakistan deported nearly all their Afghans very recently. Russia deported loads and loads of Chechens recently. It's not completely weird or odd.
Yeah.
Just because the Nazis deported lots of people, what they considered undesirable people during the war, it means it's completely evil and should never ever be attempted ever again. No. If there's a big population in your country who are subversive or even destroying the fabric of your society, you should be able to deport them. But and so UKIP and Homeland will talk about that sort of thing. AFD talk about it. Le Pen talk about it. But for Nigel Farage at Reform, apparently it's impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you know, but I was briefly selected to stand for them in Parliament and then deselected because they then discovered something I'd written about remigration, and it was too strong. It was too spicy for them.
Yeah.
So for me, reform isn't strong enough, but it is, of course, I won't deny, it is still a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
I'm not denying that.
Yeah.
It's still going to be way better than Lib Dem or even a Conservative government under Badenoch or anything. But anyway, hopefully Trump will show us the way.
Well,
because Trump's going to be deporting loads of people, right?
Well, we'll see. I mean, some people are saying it's not happening quick enough, but who knows what needs to be ramped up. But when you talk about incrementalism, it always favors the left. It always favors entropy. It never favors order. Order needs to be established, like making a movie by committee. Like, it's just going to fall apart in the end. You need a strong central authority that creates order, and then everybody else can live within that order. I don't see like an incrementalism, like we're going to get a little bit more right now, and then we're going to get a little bit more right later, and then we're going to get even righter further on down the line, other than maybe the Overton window being shifted a little bit, maybe the specter of Hitler kind of becoming more particular to a part of history that is no longer governing the minds and the hearts of people in the present that live in this reality. That might free up people to make more common sense decisions, even if the common sense isn't necessarily aligned with something a little bit more strong, like deporting or re-migrating people who've been here, 10 years, 20 years, a generation, and then figuring out where to cut off that line.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about the Overton window. I mean, you mentioned just before we started that maybe you'd like to have a conversation with Academic Agent, because you spoke to him before on your channel.
Yeah.
It was a very interesting conversation, actually. But he talked about, or coined the phrase of the boomer truth regime, another way perhaps of saying the post-war consensus. The idea that the Overton window, if it shifts at all, is always to the left. And that there will have to be some sort of realigning of that at some point.
Yeah.
Is that can't go on forever.
Yeah.
If that is left to go on forever, you end up without a country.
Yeah.
You end up with a massive welfare system and open borders.
Yeah.
Which very, very quickly leads to the destruction of your country.
Yeah.
And that people, it seems, the majority of people don't want that.
You don't think that, well, that's the big question. Where is the political will? Where's the democratic, insofar as democracy is viable, where's the democratic will to make England again, or make Britain English again? Maybe that was something was going around on Twitter about what defines an Englishman and what defines a Britishman, or one of British persuasion.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they're all very interesting and complicated things. Well, I mean, if you look at Reform, they seem to be, well, in some polls, they are leading. So according to some polls, they are the most popular party. And although they're still weak on remigration, as far as I'm concerned, They are at least patriotic light, at least, right? A lot of them talk about how you shouldn't be ashamed to be British or English. So this sort of the stripe of progressivism, which sees any type of patriotism or nationalism as just pure evil, they're not that, right? At least. So because the argument a lot of people have made is that no, most people do want their country to be flooded by foreigners. Just look at how they've voted over the last 30 or 40 years. Well, that doesn't make sense on a couple of levels. Least of all is that most governments, ever since the 60s, certainly since the 70s, have said they won't do it. And then they go back on that and do it anyway. Right? Certainly in the last 20 years.
Same with Canada. The massive immigration in Canada was not ever voted for.
Yeah, no one asked for that.
Yeah, nobody ever asked for that.
We weren't asked.
And well, I wonder, with the dying of the boomer truth regime, with the dying of the post-war consensus, something has to come in and replace it. There has to be an understanding, a visceral understanding of what is an Englishman, what is the British identity. And if you in America, American identity has been formed in the wake of wars, our Revolutionary War, our Civil War, and then World War II is like these big concrescences of identity. After World War II, we are basically the leaders of the free world. We are the strongest economy. We're really proud. We have this thing called the American dream. And our job is to make sure that the world runs correctly and spends US dollars doing so. With the dismantling of the deep state and the Trumpist kind of, he's being pretty overt. He's quoting Napoleon now. They tweeted out a picture with him with a crown on his head. Absent of war, we still need some sort of strong identity. I don't know what we're talking about here today, but I would really like to hear what you think about British identity post World War II and where that might lead you guys now. Like, what does it mean to be British? I was just walking down Manchester Street, and I think your channel's going to be putting out a little documentary on the ground here where you guys do this show, which is rather right-leaning. But if you walk around the corner here, there's this place that has definitely been built by British people, and it's older buildings, but it's completely staffed or lived in by Pakistanis, I guess. Yeah, so the church is a mosque. Like what I love to do when I go to Europe is go to visit the church. I'm like, oh, there's a church. It's a mosque. So I don't know if I'd even be allowed in there. But like where you would suppose there was a tobacco shop is now a vape shop, and all the advertisements are showing this identity that isn't of this land. So I'm wondering, like, with that around the corner, how does that affect the psyche of people growing up here? And what is the story of what it is to be a British person? I don't even know.
When you talk about the psyche, it's extremely demoralizing and alien. And we were never asked for it. No one wanted that. In fact, we've explicitly said we don't want it ever since the 1960s. It's just a foreign enclave. Yeah, and it's nearly every town and city in the whole country.
Really?
Yeah.
When we flew here, we flew into Heathrow, and we took the tube underground, and then we popped up, and the only thing I saw of London was just indistinguishable from Chicago. Just this multi-ethnic kind of rundown place with no particularity to it. Just there's kind of some older buildings, but most of it is just this kind of rundown. And I really have felt the demoralization of this place. Nobody really cares to pick up the trash. Nobody really cares to renovate, but they'll build something new, and that newness is like indescript, globalist. Everything is like an airport that is new here. Everything old is kind of unkempt a little bit. Well, maybe I'm being too strong, and I don't want to offend you.
The thing about of course not. No. The thing about that, like when you see we see footage of somewhere like San Francisco being completely unkempt. Yeah. Well, it's not been that way all that long. But if you go back 10, 15 years, it never used to be the case. Why is it suddenly now? It's a great question. I mean, one of the reasons in Britain, at least, is that the councils often are run by the same foreign people, and they don't seem to care, or they mismanage the budget terribly. I saw a clip just on Twitter the other day. It was like Chinatown in London in like the year 2005 and now. and one is the way it always used to be, i.e. well kept and clean and tidy, and now in 2025 it just looks like something from San Francisco, just a complete dump.
It's so hard to have pride in your country when your country's trashy. That shows a disrespect towards your country when it's trashy. So
and loads of shops boarded up.
Yeah.
And looking broken down, and it hasn't been that way very long.
Yeah.
When I was a child, or even when I was in my 20s, that wasn't really the case. So all this is happening recently, I would say.
I met Edward Dutton at this conference I was at, and he said, I'm okay with change happening in my lifetime, but over half a decade, that's way too much.
Yeah. But when you talked of sort of the English identity, I always think that's the sort of question that usually it just leads down the road of subversion. Usually, if you're a born and bred British person, you don't even need to ask the question. You've got more than 1,000 years of glorious tradition to look back upon, right? It's only since the war, World War II, I mean, where there's ever been a question, right? We used to have, and again, I'm talking in the first half of the 20th century or whatever, used to have an extremely strong sense of identity. Extremely strong. It seemed unassailable, you would have thought, if you'd asked someone pre-1914 what it means to be an Englishman, what it means to be British. Yeah. They probably would have snorted with derision at the very question.
Yeah, but now, they exuded Britishness, like in how they comported themselves.
But now, of course, there's a million and one things you could point to. But now, of course, ever since, well, perhaps more since the 60s and the 70s, where there's a type of... almost a civilizational level of a falling confidence, where now questions like that creep in, and if you've got a whole tranche of fifth columnists that are constantly trying to undermine you as well, then suddenly the question seems a poignant one. Well, I don't even think it is. I don't really need to answer the question.
Okay.
It's self-evident. What is, who is and who isn't an Englishman? What is and what isn't British? It's not even really a question to me. But then, subversives do just endlessly say that. They'll go further and say that you have no heritage, you have no culture. We talked to just before we came on here about Westminster Abbey. Don't tell me there's no culture. Don't tell me we haven't got any history or heritage. Absolute disgusting nonsense. But as you say, for going forward, for younger people, for like the Zoomer generations or whatever, it has become an actual question. And I mean, what a crying shame that it even needs to be addressed. It's similar to the thing of, similar-ish, conceptually, to the idea that the very concept of what a man and a woman is now under question. It's like, no, it isn't. No, actually, it's not at all. That's nonsense. That's weirdo, subversive, commie nonsense. No, I'm not having it. It's not actually a question. But there you go. I think there is that 1,000 years of glorious tradition, as I said, to point to.
You're talking about 1,000 years. So what defines that thousands of years? Was it political upheaval or innovation or expansion? Like what is the heart, the beating heart, the changing heart of Britain over that 1,000 years?
Well, that term, 1,000 years of glorious tradition, is almost a cliche. They're obviously referring to the Norman conquest onwards. Okay. But the story of the British people, the story of Britain, of these islands, obviously goes back much, much further than the Norman conquest. I mean, the Anglo-Saxon period, the Roman period. You can go back to the early Bell-Beaker people. You can point to Stonehenge. You can point to stone megaliths older than Stonehenge. You can point back to peoples that were on these islands hundreds of thousands of years ago, when there was no channel, when there was still a land bridge between Europe and England. So just like anywhere in the world, it has a contiguous story. You can point to almost anywhere. You can point to Scandinavia. You can point to peoples and cultures that were in the United States, the Clovis people, the pre-Clovis era people that go back. But you can't, well, you can, people do, but I'd say it's invalid to come over from the Caribbean or West Africa or Puerto Rico and come to the mainland United States and say, you have no history or heritage or culture, or it's all based on lies or something. It's like, no, native people here, Native American peoples, or like Clovis era or pre-Clovis era people, going back to time immemorial, going back to when there was a land bridge across the Bering Straits. It's just it's an ahistorical thing that people that want to destroy your culture or your society will try and pull that trick.
Yeah.
And it's up to us to stand up against it and say, no, all of that is nonsense. No, we see what you're doing. We see what you're doing, and we're not going to have it. But yeah, if you talk about just the 1,000 years, if you want to just start at the
well, isn't that
conquest,
a history of incursions and people coming over? Like the Romans came over and found a bunch of swamp people. I think Caesar, somebody was talking about that. I think Carl Benjamin was memeing about that. So maybe I might be wrong about that. One of those.
Well, I've done a fair bits of content about Caesar's conquest, Caesar's incursions into Britain in 55 and 54.
But I'm just saying, part of the story is being incurred upon. Is being overwhelmed by some foreign force, and then a reintegration happens. So I'm wondering if this is not just the latest Roman conquest; it's just oddly done by like this invading force that somehow your rulers are supplanting. For some.
Of course, there's always been waves and movements of people. Yeah, of course, and that's true of again everywhere in the world. But what's happening to us at the moment, or what's the trend that has started in 1997, i.e. just mass immigration into this country, that is entirely unprecedented. So if you look at the Roman invasion, for example, a tiny number of Romans compared to the 700,000, 900,000 million odd people we import year on year here. So what the Romans did was a tiny amount. And in the end, they left. And in the end, they all left. In 409 or 410 BC, they all left. Yeah. If you look at the Anglo-Saxon and Jutish invasions, it was only really on the east coast of Britain, and it was limited, and once again tiny numbers compared to what's happening today. If you look at the Viking incursions, once again, it's not that they didn't leave an imprint on the land or on the language in all sorts of ways, on the architecture, but the numbers were tiny, and it was over quite a long period. It was over centuries, and again, in the end, were expelled. Right. So, and there's lots more examples. If you sometimes people who are sort of pro mass migration might mention like a wave of Dutch immigration that came in like the 18th century, 16th, 17th century. It's a few thousand people, a few tens of thousands of people at most. It's not hundreds of thousands of people year on year that never leave, that never go home or don't intend to. So, yeah, there's always been waves of migration and remigration and movements of people. That's always been the case. Go back to the era of of Stonehenge, when there was sort of original Neolithic farmer people seem to have been invaded by European bell beaker culture people. So there's always been movements of people to and from these islands, but nothing ever on the scale of what's happened since 1997, or has been ramped up in the last few years. The Boris wave, people are calling it now, and all those things. That's unprecedented.
Do you have a sense
that is truly a passive ethnic cleansing. Like what you said about Manchester Road in Swindon, or any town or city up and down the country. You're suddenly in a foreign enclave. That wasn't the case 10, 15 years ago. It's happened very suddenly and on a scale never experienced before.
Is there like an economic purpose for that? A failure, a pre-failure, like a pre-demoralization of leadership? Like, why?
It's a very difficult question
so there's all these different reasons why.
And I mean, we've got very strict laws in this country. If I gave you my real opinion why, I might fall foul of some...
I might not be able to leave because they put me in prison.
Throw you in the clink for hearing me speak the truth. No, I mean, it's because our ruling classes have been traitorous. They genuinely thought Tony Blair and some of his governments wanted to, and it's literally a quote, rub our noses in diversity. They still try to make the argument, even now, don't they, that diversity is a strength, that our very economy will collapse unless we import hundreds of thousands of low-skilled people that hate our values. It doesn't make any sense. It's purely traitorous and treasonous. Yeah. Well, why is it? I mean, the same in the United States or in Canada. Why has the Trudeau government decided to import so many foreign people.
Yeah.
That why? If you got an answer for that, it'd be the same reason. It's because there's a cabal of people with shadowy motivations that are doing it against the will of the people. That's the answer, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Surely that is the answer.
At some level, one could suppose, I think, I don't want to reveal who was telling me about this, but they were just riffing about how maybe because Britain went around and colonized the world, this is kind of some sort of comeuppance. But
it's revenge.
Yeah, revenge.
Intergenerational revenge.
But the people who colonized the world were the elite, and the people who colonized Britain are the same people, the same elite. So it's the elite that are doing this, not the British people. The British people didn't sign up for either of this. I'm sure they benefited from colonization, and that's a big topic with a lot more nuance than I see willfully discussed about on Reddit of all places. But
that argument is flawed and disgusting on a number of levels.
Well, could you set loose on that? Are you legally obligated?
Yeah, I can say a number of things about that. Like, first of all, so if that is the rationale, i.e. it's a revenge for colonialism or for the empire. Okay, so what, two wrongs do make a right, do they? If it was wrong for us to have an empire and colonize countries, other places in the world, if that was morally repugnant in the first place, but it's not now, it's happening to us. And again, children aren't guilty of the crimes of their parents. So even if you do think that which I don't, but even if you did think that our great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents did something wrong, still, we now are not guilty of those crimes. So it's completely unjust to do that.
That argument I have a hard time with because I could see it being rejiggered. I mean, I agree with it, but I could just see like a counter that the kids who are born here of immigrants, they shouldn't be punished for the sins of their parents. Their parents came over here illegally, maybe, but the child shouldn't have to suffer from deportation or re-immigration, which it still feels a little Orwellian to me. And similarly, the people who were born in Pakistan, this is very Rawlsian take. They don't deserve the inefficiencies or the inaction of their parents, but the case is that our forefathers do establish the conditions under which we have to deal with, right? So not necessarily the sins of our fathers, but to extent the productivity or the laziness of our fathers, we do have to. Sure.
Well, if you look at, I'll give two examples of the British Raj in India, when the British actually had controlled government in India, or if you look at white South Africans in South Africa. In both those cases, when the government falls, the native populations then do expel them, even if they were born there, even if they're third, fourth, fifth generation. No, you're not welcome anymore. No, if you do stay, we'll start murdering you. Okay, so there's I'm not saying that's good.
Okay, yeah,
right.
So you're not saying two wrongs make a right.
No, absolutely,
okay.
I'm not. No. But I'm saying there's historical precedent for that. Why is it a unique situation in Britain that you can't have your country back after being essentially invaded? I use the word passive ethnic cleansing. If you go to some of the big cities in, all over London, all over Britain, Blackburn, there's all the cities basically. They're our cities. Why should we not have them back? The people came here against our will. Well, then perhaps they can go back against theirs. Now, that might sound like an extremely authoritarian, extremely harsh idea or policy, but there it is. It's that, or you lose your country for all time.
Yeah, well,
or you end up in a balkanization state. You end up in what's happening in South Africa. You end up with a nightmare like that. A nightmare. I mean, what's it going to be?
Yeah.
When you set a country down a path like that, I didn't realize we'd be talking about all this. I thought we were talking about your channel and all the interviews you've done.
This is I'm thinking about this because I walked through Manchester Street and I just saw like every brick, every house, every roof shingle, it's all falling apart. Every single thing is falling apart. And then you bring to mind South Africa, and not only is it naturally falling apart, but they're actively breaking apart roads. So at some point when law and order are eroded because there's too many people that don't believe or don't have a consensus to follow that rule of law, then that natural entropy accelerates into open entropy. And what you were saying earlier before we started about was it Serbia, the Balkans, like eventually there is going to be internecine racial conflict. And eventually the native Britons are going to either have to move out, stand their ground, or actively pursue deportation, if not retaliatory violence, which nobody wants. Assumably nobody wants that.
Yeah. No, absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's one of the things I said in the piece I wrote, which got me deselected from Reform. I said I was calling for mass remigration or mass deportations, but I said explicitly it needs to be bloodless or as bloodless as possible. It needs to pour as little shame on us as possible. Yeah, absolutely. I don't want a Yugoslavian war in England.
Yeah.
And I mentioned what happened with the breakup of Yugoslavia, where you've got Croats and Serbs and Albanians and Kosovars and just a multicultural, multi-religious, multi-ethnic mishmash, and they all just start ethnically cleansing each other. I don't want that. I don't want that future for Britain. Does that make me a Nazi? Does that make me a crazy bigot? Does that make me a far-right fantasist, that I see that down the road and I don't want it? Well, it does seem that that's the way it's going, that you get bigger and bigger foreign enclaves and smaller, almost certainly rural native enclaves. And at what point does it all spark off and go crazy like what happened in Yugoslavia in the 1990s? How many rapes do we have to suffer? How many murders? How many along racial and ethnic lines? How many terrorist incidents do there have to be before it explodes into a Yugoslavia 1990s Serbia thing?
I think when one thinks of Britain, so I'm from the West Coast, and my exposure to British culture is mostly through movies, some through music. While I was walking around, I put on Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd album. It was this interesting kind of vibe, like exchange with that. But I think of why the elite or the upper middle class British person would allow this to happen and not disturb the peace, because there's this prevailing politeness, British politeness, perhaps, I don't know. But if you look at Britain in a larger picture, there's also a particular British nobility, and not just the British nobility, but a nobility of character, a dignity of character, and a strength. And what remigration calls upon is strength. It calls upon a more masculine, I guess one could say calloused, or one could say thicker skinned approach to what needs to be done. It's going to be hard. People are not going to want to leave. There are going to be photos of crying children, and there will be resistance, and then that resistance will be met with strength. And I've spoken about this when I interview British gentlemen usually, about the fate of the British male right now. I wonder to what degree, I just lost my thought, but I wonder to what degree.
Well, you saw a fair few people at ARC, didn't you not, that are sort of prepared to stand up and say these more difficult, more hardline things?
You guys, I think courage begins with speech. And it's really interesting that you guys are not allowed to speak. That disconnects you from your courage, because then you're only left with action, and then you cannot justify your action beforehand if you can't speak your action. If you can't say, if you don't do this, then this will happen. If you can't speak that, then when there's an outburst and all you can do is then it just looks like violence. It looks like mindless violence. And it doesn't have any human character, nobility, or courage in that. So I think it's incredibly courageous for you guys to speak first as much as you can. But the courage, if that speech doesn't lead into action, then true courage, you're going to have to call upon the certain parts of your history where perhaps armor is or skin as thick as armor comes out, and the sharp word is replaced by harder implement, let's say.
Well, when we look back through history in the English example, some people say the English never, because we didn't get involved in the French Revolution and there weren't massive revolutions in 1848. Some people think Britons never revolt and never push back against the state. But there's loads and loads of examples throughout history when they have indeed. Britain has fallen into a type of anarchy and or civil war. There are lots and lots and lots of examples of it. So, okay, we've got the Peasants' Revolt, the Civil War, Wyatt's Rebellion. The list is actually really quite long. And again, if you look back at throughout history, talking about not being able to speak, so oppression or repression or censorship. If you look back at through just a couple of examples off the top of my head, if you look at the collapse of the Soviet Union, a very repressive system. But when it collapsed quick because everyone already knew, and everyone among themselves had already been talking about it for years and years and years. There's many examples of dictatorships or oppressive, censorious regimes collapsing very, very quickly when it seemed that they were as strong as they ever were. Look at Franco's Spain, or you look at Yugoslavia with Tito, or you look at Ceausescu, or again, there are just lots and lots of examples of where it seems that people can't speak, and then it all falls apart. I mean, even Tsarist Russia teetered for a while. Tsarist Russia was nowhere near as oppressive as the Soviet era, but nonetheless, when it collapsed, it collapsed quick because real people, real men, had been talking about it and thinking about it for a long time already.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, one wonders about the economics of such a regime change or change of things. I mean, it calls upon the relinquishing of one's comfortableness, being comfortable. But if the world is already, if your comforts are already declining, there might be a time to.
Well, that's the thing. People say we won't rise up and do anything because it's too easy not to, because everyone's sort of middle class and comfortable. Well, what about when you're not anymore? What about when inflation is so high you can't afford to buy a bloody block of cheese? You can't afford to heat your own home. You can't afford your mortgage. Your wife or sister or daughter has been raped. You've been forced out of the place your forefathers have lived in for generations. You've been forced to live somewhere else because you've been intimidated out of that area by foreigners. Like there will be a point. There is a point. Every people have got a breaking point. Yeah. But
we were in the other studio. Your like Starship studio. This is the cozy studio. Yeah. And you're talking about every day. You guys do a stream. Is it every day you guys do?
Every weekday. Yeah.
Every weekday. Wow. Yeah. And you're like, it's usually so many black pills, and I try to bring a white pill. Let's find a white pill. Is there?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I didn't realize. I thought I'd be interviewing you all about you.
Yeah. Good
and
luck with that.
We started off just straight up talking about Trump, and then the state of England. But So there's loads of things I wanted to ask you. Tons of things. So, first of all, you went to ARC. Did you enjoy it? Is this your first time in England?
Yeah, I've flown through. I was in Killarney, Ireland, a couple of years ago for a GenSpect conference around the gender issue. Organization that's working on the various aspects of gender ideology and its effects on people's bodies and families and something like that. But yeah, this is the first time I've been to London. I'm staying in Westminster now, so I'm absorbing more actual London and getting to see the Abbey and the Houses of Parliament and stuff like that. But ARC was in. Sorry,
I was just saying. I think your wife is at the British Museum today.
Yes,
if you can go there. I think the two best things you can go to in London is the British Museum and Westminster Abbey. And again, before we were recording, I pressed upon you that you must visit the Abbey. It's free to go in. It's not open every day. I mean, sometimes they actually have mass in there and stuff. So it's not sort of open 24/7, but nonetheless, it is free to get in. And I think, I'm pretty sure it is. Last time I went, it was. Anyway, do go there if you can.
It's really odd. I've been to Europe. I've been to France and Austria and a couple other places briefly. And Britain is really odd. It's odd to be so far from home and yet so close to the culture. Like everything's in English. And there's some older architecture, but mostly it's just people dress better. Like that, there's not like a distance between me and this culture, and so it's just odd. I have a hard time looking at it. I have a hard time really like seeing it. Like when I went to France, or I went to a monastery a monkery. What's it called? An abbey of some sort.
A monastery.
Yeah, monastery. Monkery. I think it's nunnery, right? Like there was enough distance for me to appreciate that. The distance is a lot shorter. So I'm having a hard time absorbing it because it just feels so close to who I am in a way. So I feel kind of like this.
Are your ancestors English or Irish, Scottish, Dutch?
I think a lot of English and some Irish.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Voice, I think, is Le It's a anglicized Le Bois.
Right.
So we've been here for a while. There's one William Boyce is a composer.
Boyce is a pretty Irish name. Yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah.
So.
Okay, so did you like Arc, or did you find it a bit of a waste of time, or it was better than you expected, or tell me about Arc?
Arc was really interesting. It was so they kept on bringing up Noah Harari, this transhumanist guy who's featured in the WEF, the World Economic Forum, right? The WEF, and Arc is kind of over. Like they mentioned Harari quite a lot. Kind of like as their foil, like, well, we're not him. Like, look at him, we're not him.
Transhumanist, a globalist.
Globalist, yeah, eats the bugs, kind of Schwab's right hand.
A race communist. All people are equal and the same.
Yeah, sort of basically cogs in a wheel, and so the WEF is the World Economic Forum, and ARC I think was pretty explicitly modeled as a response to the WEF. But ARC kept on talking about we're going to save the West. Okay. And I think that saving the West is just one meridian shy of trying to save the world. It's basically globalist. It's basically this huge tent where we're going to kind of say a bunch of things, but we're not going to really say anything really explicitly. We're not going to take a really strong stand on any given one of these things, but we're going to mention Christianity. We're going to mention how kids need to not be on phones and pornography needs to be banned, maybe, and how awesome Gen X is. And I'm talking about the speakers. So I was there. I listened to it. I'm like, well, what do you guys really, what are we here for? What are we really here for? When we talk about Christianity, what Christianity are we talking about? When we talk about saving the West, what is the West? What is the West? I guess it's basically after World War II, it's a bunch of American satellite states in America, basically, or Europe. But they didn't say Europe. We're not going to save Europe because, Americans are there. And so that was kind of the program, but I think it needs to be broad enough for ideas to percolate. Like in the schmoozing place. And in the schmoozing place, there's 4,000 people there. And I was trying to figure out who all these people were. There was a lot of young people and a lot of older people in suits. And so I think that what it was being used for, whether intentionally or unintentionally, was for young people who are looking for opportunity to meet older people who are looking for something to invest in. And so just allowing some sort of coalition building with regard to career. And what I think is very important while Trump is going through and dismantling the deep state, so-called, and just kind of like dissolving a lot of these positions, is that until we have a new order, until somebody can see a whole career path in this new institution, in this new American institution, or whatever that's going to be, it lacks longevity until you have that. And so ARC was very light on myth building. Like they talked about we need a new story, but like nobody was ready to like tell the story.
Okay.
And I don't know if we want to hear the story. I think it's more important, in order to not be globalist, is to be more particularist and say that Hungarians are Hungarian, British are British, French are French. And until we remember who we are as people and build our strength and our identity, return to our identity, just like I'm saying with what needs to happen in Britain in order to change the flow of events, until those particularities are revitalized, then we can have like a West. Then those different particular things can go up and have a coalition. But that coalition has to dissolve right now. I think American hegemony being withdrawn is going to probably make Europe suffer. but that suffering, like no longer being basically vassals of America, is going to give you guys the opportunity to really say, who are we? What do we need to do? And I think ARC was an umbrella for that to start to take place.
Interesting, very, very interesting. I mean, you use the word particularist. Some people might say regionalist or even nationalist. I would like to see the word nationalist or nationalism lose its connotations of being evil or something. It's like, no, we have a nation. I belong to the nation. Like somehow the word patriot is okay, but the word nationalist isn't. I've never really bought that because there is also the connotation of national socialism. And but anyway,
you guys need to get over. You keep on bringing up Nazi. You keep on bringing up Hitler.
Exactly what you said. You need to. I think I completely agree with what you said. We need to be unashamedly, completely unashamedly, just pro-national. Let's say that at least. I know Carl doesn't particularly like the word nationalist or nationalism, but just be completely unapologetic about your own country. Yeah, no, absolutely.
I think that on a deeper level, a lot of people brought up Christianity and brought up spirituality, and I don't know to what extent you guys are secularist. I find Carl.
Well, I'm an atheist.
Okay, you're an atheist.
I am. Yeah.
I find
skeptic, let's say.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not a true atheist.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a God or not. That's my position.
Yeah.
That's my position. I don't know if there is or not. Nobody can. That's my position.
I don't want to slag on Carl. It's his show and I really like him, but I find it fascinating how he bags on atheists and he's like, we need to have a Christian. He's pointing in the Christian direction, but he can't be Christian, right? He can't.
He never used to be. He used to be sort of very fairly vocally atheist.
Yeah.
Or no, it's right. Yeah. It's funny.
I think that there is some need for whatever nationalism or community is to be bounded by a particular mythos and a particular forms and rituals. And in my estimation, if you're going to establish rituals, you should establish some direction for those rituals that is higher than, let's say, a car or even a nation. That transcendent value, you could use words like truth or justice or something like that, but God is a pretty good direction if it's properly conceived. But without humbling oneself and syncing up with your fellow man and having some sort of relationship that isn't just language based, just ethnicity based, just sports teams based. There needs to be some sort of glue that I think, and I think that.
Are you a Christian? Do you consider yourself Christian?
I can't not be a Christian, but I can't be a Christian because I have a difficult time with belief. Like I have a difficult time. Dogma. I have a really hard time with that.
Me too.
Right. I have a really hard time with that, but I believe that there is a spiritual dimension to life that allows for people to connect on a deeper level. And I think any sort of community or communal action that doesn't have a spiritual component is going to go down the path of entropic hell. I think that
I agree with you there.
without some sort of value and aim that's higher than will to power, then nationalism or any other sort of movement of power will end up being very materialistic and very inhumane.
No, I completely agree with you. I think Christopher Hitchens talked about like the numinous. The idea that spiritualism in the very broadest sense, the idea that there is something bigger than just materialism. There's something bigger and more important, and the human condition isn't divorced from something like that, but not sort of Christianity. I without thinking, described myself as an atheist a moment ago. I'm not an atheist because an atheist says there certainly isn't a God. I say, I don't know. That's the truth, as far as I can tell, is that I don't know. We seem to be spiraling through space. That seems to be true. The galaxy is spiraling through the cosmos.
But there's a meaning to Britain.
Whether the theology and the words that were written in the scriptures and the gospel, no, I'm not. I'm not particularly interested in that. If I was to worship anything, it might be the sun. Yeah. Right. I'm not saying I'm a pagan either. I'm not a pagan. But I don't buy the dogma, the Christian dogma. I don't buy into it. don't believe, I don't have faith. You're asked to have a type of blind faith, and I can't do it. I can't, if I'm honest with myself, deep down, all I can say, I believe in or I have faith, the images that Hubble or the James Webb have sent back to us. That seems to be what the cosmos is, not what I'm told by Tertullian, right? So okay, I'm not saying there might be a God. I don't know. That's my position. I do not know. In fact, it's unknowable whether there is or not. I feel like that's the only sort of honest position to hold. But as you said, I think it is absolutely important to have something like a spirituality, some sort of narrative or story that's bigger than us, that's bigger than merely materialism and the human condition. Otherwise, you descend into some type of hell. Otherwise, right? That is playing out. In the 21st century world,
in your country,
isn't it?
In your country.
In your country.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure.
I mean, look at California. Some places in California.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at
it has descended
the mental
into
health of our youth, right?
Yeah.
There's you. So when you talk about Britain, when you talk about what it is to be British, you talk about history because you're a historian. So you go to history, right? You're a fan of history, okay? Yeah.
I'm sorry,
humble,
I'm nitpicking.
right?
I'm being pedantic.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But when I asked you, well, what is that? What is the character of Britain? You can point to all these places on a time map, right? Where this thing happened, and this thing happened, this thing happened. And you can tell all these different stories in these relationships, and you can point to all these sites and who built them and stuff like that. But there's this spirit of the land. There's a spirit of the people that is more than the sum of its parts. There is a Britishness. And I think that even when the conversation that erupted on Twitter about what is a British person and is that necessarily an ethnicity, there's a style and a tone of voice and a way of looking at the world and a way of interacting with the world. This sounds like woke right postmodernism, but it's true that you are a part of a people that has a particular taste and smell and tone of voice and set of values to you. And I think that is a spiritual, and by spiritual, I just mean that is an aggregate sense that you have of the thing. And I think that it would be really difficult to convey that to young men in order for them to take pride in their land without reducing it into story, right? And I think that the Bible or any sort of religious document is the attempt to communicate a very big reality through these little tiny stories of this happened, and you see the nature of reality through all of these different stories. And the problem that I have with dogma is like it's distilling those stories, which are already a distillation of experience. They're distilled into stories and then distilling those stories into little statements. And like I can't go that far. Like the stories should lead up, not down into dogma, but up into experience. So
that's way of putting it.
Yeah. So that's where I stand with religion, probably.
No, it's a very nice way of visualizing it, of putting it. Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to talk to you all about, which I actually in my mind thought we'd only be talking about, is your channel and your content and your journey. So I thought my first question, I literally thought as soon as we start, I'd say I'm talking to Benjamin Boyce. Tell me about your uni days.
My uni days.
Yeah, and how you started making content.
Is that another word for onesies? We're going to start my toddler era?
No.
Uni?
No, university.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, sorry. Because that was really how you started making content, right? I remember, because you've been doing it for quite a few years now.
Yeah, coming on 8.
8 years, funny.
Yeah.
And your channel knocking very close to 100,000, big 100K. Let's get in there, guys. If you haven't subbed to Benjamin Boyce.
You don't have to turn on the notification or something, but if you subscribe, that would be nice. Just to get that freaking number.
Right. It's completely arbitrary, but you want it.
Yeah, right? I know. It'd just be a nice milestone.
No, sure. And you got like 1,300 odd videos more. You're quite prolific. I mean, even for 8 years, that's quite a lot.
Maybe it is a lot. I think it's over 500 interviews, and I mainly just do interviews now. But wow, sheesh.
And
Well, once you get into it, you just have to create content. It became a job.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It became a job. It became work. So, the work is to keep the content flowing, and so
You've got to feed the algorithm.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess so.
That's no criticism. That's what we do here.
No, that's what you guys
We're
do
a
here.
content mill.
Yeah,
Right?
no, and you guys have a lot of smart people. I'm just on my own. I see a lot of people who started after me like get really big really quick. I'm like, I'm not gonna be jealous. I'm doing my own thing. Moisturized in my lane. I'm focused on what I need to focus. But yeah,
I'm the same with some history friends.
Yeah.
Started way after me, and they're now 7 times, 10, 20 times bigger than my channel. It's like, okay.
That's fine. I try to be humble.
Your stuff is really great, though. I mean, I'm not just blowing smoke up your ass for the sake of it. I think your channel is very, very good. I think your style, your energy is brilliant. I can't fault you.
Well, thank you.
I wish I was more like it. Like I've never seen you lose your temper or come close.
I've been retarded before, and I've failed certain interviews. Like there's one that comes to mind. I interviewed Konstantin Kisin, and I still just in my craw.
When was that? Was that not too long ago?
It was not too long ago. Konstantin Green. I saw him at ARC. He did a brilliant ending speech. He's a brilliant guy, and like there's something about
what happened
misconnection.
With that what happened?
Well, it goes. I don't want to talk about that necessarily, but I'll just say that what I try to do. I do a lot of interviews. I spent a lot of time, probably one of my landmark things, besides the Evergreen State College story. I did a landmark documentary because I was at that college, and that was peak wokeness. In that probably that documentary that's pretty extensive, that occurred in 2015 to 2017. That's the period I cover at the Evergreen State College, a small little super progressive college in Olympia, Washington. Everything that happened there happened on the world stage in 2020. Yeah. Everything that happened in 2020, aside from a novel coronavirus it's
remarkable, the microcosm of what happened.
But all the BLM stuff, all the racial awakening. Yeah. So everything happened there. So that was my bread and butter for a really long time. Got sick of racial politics. And somehow I moved on to gender. And in the gender discussion, I found this group of individuals that are kind of called detransitioners, have had usually in their teens or 20s developed a trans identity or transfixation and went to a certain degree down that transitional path. And in those interviews, it was a really interesting topic to see what's happening with this group of people. But the most important thing about the interview was to really get a portrait of who this person was. And, the ideology and like what they ended up doing and how that was a bad decision or not for them. It was besides the point. It's like, who is this person? And this is the topic is this detransition. And so with the Kisin thing, like I didn't get to that connection.
He
like
didn't let you in.
I don't know. And I'm not a good arguer. And there's certain things that he was arguing that I just couldn't overcome. And so like I got egg all over my face because I couldn't argue with him. I was looking for something else. And so that like in relief, that kind of shows you what I'm trying to do, not necessarily consciously, but in an interview when it gets to a place where things like go into this other deeper level. And then maybe if the conversation is really good, like I'll ask a question and you get this person like looking at things and they just look at it in a whole different way. And so I'm really interested in how people look at the world. And my job is to be I call it like the stage is like the stage is theirs, but I'm the theater's mine. Right. So I give them, and I'm just kind of setting up the lights and the attitude and the atmosphere for something more human, and hopefully to kind of break through a little bit of the shallowness of our age, or at least of our current way of communicating. And that's why I love your content. And especially when you come on my show, even though we're not talking about you specifically, every once in a while I like try to peek into your life, but like we just really get into the story of who Grant was, and like who this person was. And I'm really a who person. That's how I organize information and organize the values of my life. It's like, who is that person?
No, that's great. And I think you do it very, very well.
Thank you.
I mean, when the first time we spoke was I think it was the War of 1812 one, wasn't it?
Did we start there?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was our first long form conversation. And you just allowed me to run wild. You allowed me the stage. You set up the stage and the lights for me. And perfectly, I thought.
Oh, it was great.
Because some people often, I find, because I've done a bit of interviewing myself, been interviewed once or twice and done a fair few interviews, and there's quite often a different dynamic. Sometimes the person really wants to dominate and you can barely get a word in. Sometimes you have to really coax them. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's 50-50, whatever. But usually if I'm the interviewee and it's history, I'm probably most comfortable doing the vast majority of the lifting. Mm-hmm. And just seamlessly, with nothing contrived beforehand, you just let me do it. You just let me go.
Yeah.
And just tweaks me in the right direction every now and again, keep me on just about on the right path.
Thinking, what are we going to cover next?
It just worked perfectly for me. And I see nearly all the interviews you do, you pull that off. You seem to pull that off. Well, I can't think of an example when I was like, oh, Boyce is ruining this. Yeah. I can't think of an example. Yeah. So that's great. Long may it last.
The content isn't necessarily... Well, I mean, if somebody subscribes to me, I don't... You hear, like, I've watched your content, but not all of it. I'm like, oh, I hope not. Nobody has time to watch. I don't even have time to watch all of it. You know, I don't do hardly any editing. I just like that pure, like, hour and a half or so. But it's not for everybody, and it's not for the algorithm either. But it's like, I think there's this concept of the long tail of, like... And I heard this a while ago, and the example used is that Britney Spears gets a whole bunch of attention, but and these rarer bands get a lot less attention, but over time that kind of shakes out. If you make really good content in that long tail, because of the way that media is accessed so easily, now you can make kind of a mom and pop living off of not doing anything too big and just following your interests, following your curiosity. Right now I'm mapping out what would be called the dissident right, except they're kind of a little bit in power, so they need to stop being dissidents and actually put where the rubber meets the road. The E-right, the more what's on the edge of the right edge of the Overton window. I've been interviewing that because I think there's a lot of ideas there, even though the people might not be articulating them in a way that it will be accessible to the centrists or even allowable in polite society. There's still a lot over there. I'm really fascinated, and especially I'm fascinated in the contention between the classical liberals and the more further right individuals, such as Carl's arc from kind of being an atheist liberal into somewhere. I love that. One of the things I love to do is to have people on repeatedly over time, every couple of years or so, and just to watch and get a portrait of somebody in time. And that's really important. It's something that we forget, and that's something that the woke cancel culture era kind of overlooked about human nature, is that you can be a 15-year-old racist and then a 25-year-old humanitarian. Like there's this huge trajectory that we're always going on, and intellectually how much more complex somebody, and if you're not developing and if you're regressing, that's a story too. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating the way, like, for example, the various dialogues between James Lindsay and Carl Benjamin. There was sort of a fairly famous-ish, famous in inverted commas, debate they had, and you've had them both on before and since. And all that, so, I've been on a couple, three times or whatever, and you've done that with a whole bunch of different people. And it's great because everyone's on a journey. I always think it's one of the worst things in the world when you're expected to form your entire worldview and all your politics by the time you're 18 or by the time you're 22. And that's it. You have to stick with that until the end of your life. Otherwise, you're a hypocrite or you're an idiot or something. No, that's terrible. Everyone's on a journey, and you need to be able to change your mind and even profoundly change your mind on things. And that's okay. It's intellectually honest to admit it.
I think one of the best aspects of our interviews, like let's say with Hamilton or Grant, I feel like we both, like, you're telling a story and you're telling the story, and I'm asking you questions, and it seems like we've taken pictures of them through time. Like with Ulysses, I remember, like, at this period of time he was here, and I love the history is such a natural way to tell a story. The biography is like, who was he at this point in time? What was he fighting against? And then he goes and he's in this other completely different place. Grant, like, he was just nobody, and then he was in charge of, like, routing out the South. Like what pressures or those two individuals under, and how does one inform the other and the other inform the one? That's
I love doing that because I do quite a lot of my history themed content is essentially a biography of someone. I mean, not always that. Sometimes it's something else, or war, or broader themes. But often I'm just looking at something like the life of Ulysses S. Grant, or the life of Henry IV, or the life of Alfred the Great, or whatever it is. And so you do it. It's obvious, really, to sort of do it chronologically. This is what their childhood was like, and onwards. If I can ever do that, just I'm glad you like it. You seem to actually enjoy them. If I, don't want to blow my own trumpet, I feel a bit self-conscious, but hopefully I do these stories some justice.
Yeah.
I do hope to see someone's journey.
Yeah.
From childhood to death.
I think our work is
always fascinating.
I think our work is very similar. I mean, the historian always flavors or colors the subject matter.
Of course.
And of course you're picking up facts, and I was thinking about this because one of the arguments that I had around Kissen was about this internet creator Daryl Cooper, Martyr Made, and he's made some salacious statements about Churchill. I would love to hear your thoughts on Churchill. And Daryl's kind of challenged the Churchill godlikeness and the savior of the West kind of narrative, and the argument with Kissen was whether or not Daryl was lying. And what is the truth of the matter? And truth is the most important thing. We're talking about truth. I'm like, history is a string of facts.
It's always going to be a narrative.
Tied together by a narrative. So I'm interested in the narrative. And it's not as clean as we want, but it's not going to be clean. You're going to have competing facts, I'm sure, either, because the way that the documents are handed down to us and stuff. So in a sense, there's a way that we can embrace our meddling hands and do the story justice, right? There's a way. I'm trying to take all my detransitioner interviews and turn them into a book, and I realized that I can't just transcribe that. I need to really relive that and get into the head of the experience of a 14-year-old girl bullied at school, obsessed with the internet, and then just discovers that she's actually a boy. And then goes through this whole fever dream up to and including injecting herself with testosterone and growing a little bit of the beard and changing her voice. Like, what is it to feel in that head, to really like embrace that? So that wouldn't be a historical document. It'd be based on these historical experiences, but trying to convey to the audience not just the facts and not even just the story, but the being there, which is more of the novelist's job. Right. I don't know where I was going with that.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I mean, talking about sort of the nature of history and the kissing and the Churchill thing, I mean, the reality is that there's no such thing as an objective view of the past. As you say, there will always be the historian's hand is in the narrative that he weaves. It's impossible for it not to be. So the job of an honest or a good, quote unquote, good historian is to minimise that as much as possible. And that's the best you can ever hope for. We can't agree what happened yesterday, even though it's on camera, right? So we certainly will not be able to agree exactly what was the objective truth of what happened in 1399, for example. So that is always the case. But I would say history never stands still. So that it will always be the narratives that any historian weaves. Not only will he leave his own imprint, his own voice on the story, but it will also be a product of his time and his politics. Yeah. So, for example, you look back at Churchill through the lens of the 1970s will be quite different to looking back at him through the lens of the 2020s. The view that for example, the view of, let's say, Julius Caesar, at one point is extremely popular. Or someone like Cicero might be a better example. At some point, he's one of the most famous, one of the most beloved figures in history. And then actually he's a bit later in another period, he's a bit gauche and unpopular. And then the pendulum will swing back and so on. So that's always the way it's going to be. I mean, just for me, if I just throw in my 2 pence on Churchill, I'm not much of a fan. I don't buy the narrative that he's the greatest Briton that ever lived, for example. I've got many, many criticisms. But That's just me. There isn't an objective truth. It's not, it's not possible to retrieve one.
Yeah.
The past is profoundly lost to us and will always remain so.
Yeah.
So you're only going to be constructing an image, a shadow.
Well, from the point of view of a historian, that is the noble and humble way of viewing things. But from the point of view of a people, we need those myths. We need a hero. We need to have somebody who's the standard bearer of how we got here and why we belong here, why we deserve this, whether ill or good. And so I wonder, and maybe people don't need a figure like Washington or like any of these great historical figures. Maybe we don't necessarily need those great men to define our history, but it's a very politically valuable tool to have somebody that stated or that embodied the spirit of the country for a period of time and set the standard. And I think that's one of the beloved aspects of monarchy, and one of the sad things about monarchy being here is that you had somebody who aspired to and was expected to be the embodiment of and the soul of the people on some level. And I think we lose a little bit of direction without having that, and that's why somebody like Elon Musk is very galvanizing, because that man runs all these companies and he's responsible for all of them and they're responsible to him. There's this really direct Elon-ness that he's fulfilling. That's why Trump is actually so scary to people. And I think that's why he's flirting with autocracy and the trappings of kingsmanship, because he's tapping into something that we long for, which is a leader, which is somebody that's great, that's going to push us forward, that we can still say, well, he's flawed, but he's driving us somewhere. And so I wonder again if that's not what is going to be necessary for all these different European countries, to have a rallying point, to have a strong man to lead you guys forward.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, talk about the Napoleon quote he came up. I think it's actually a Cicero quote.
Oh, yeah?
I think Cicero said it after the Catalan conspiracy. I've got a whole video on the Catalan conspiracy and spoken about Cicero many times.
What was the quote again? He who loves his country violates no law.
Yeah. I think Cicero said that after, or perhaps when he was put on trial for his role in the Catalan conspiracy. But anyway, that's just a side note. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about the sort of the need for a strong leader. I mean, again, when you look back at history, you look back at the pre-modern world, at least, or the ancient world, it was sort of a struggle for survival until you get a surplus of food, and then you can have artisans, teachers, doctors, and leaders. Any sort of large collective does need leadership. There's this idea of the left, which is odd because there's so many examples like Stalin or Mao, but the left think that the idea of having a strong man, of having a leader, is somehow intrinsically wrong-headed and evil and a slippery slope to, I don't know what, the Holocaust again or something. It's like, no. Any strong collective will need a leader. There's nothing wrong with that. Again, it's sort of hard baked into our being, because we're a pack animal. Humans are essentially a pack animal. So you're going to need a leadership.
Isn't it a particular quality of British history that, one aspect of British history is not only the kings, but the developments, the political innovations of accountability around the king?
Yeah, sure. That's a very, very strong thing. I mean, of course, ever since the Glorious Revolution, or certainly since Queen Victoria.
Is that an ironic title, or was it really glorious?
Oh, well, if you're a Protestant pro-parliamentarian, it was pretty glorious.
Okay.
I think for the average person, it didn't make much difference in various ways.
Okay.
If you're a Catholic, it's certainly not glorious. It's terrible. It's never been right since. Depends who you are, depends how you're looking at it. Right. But yeah, if you're a Protestant Church of England pro-parliament person, then it was pretty damn glorious, yeah. But anyway, ever since then, it's been Parliament, not the King. But it doesn't matter whether you call it a president, a king, a chancellor, a prime minister. I mean, it's effectively the same thing. The cockpit of power, the cockpit of policy making sits with this individual. It sort of doesn't matter as much what their name is. But yeah, I wanted to. I realise we've been going for already a bit of time. I don't know how much.
Usually these conversations are about 90 minutes, so we can start to.
Okay.
We don't have a female pilot, so we don't have to worry about the landing here.
One thing I did really want to ask you about, and I was a bit worried that it might be somewhere between annoying for you or outright, can we just not, was about Evergreen.
Oh, yeah.
Just because you've done it to death.
No. Yeah.
But I'm still fascinated, because on your channel, there's so much content there, but you've got sort of pinned towards the top, sort of that 12-part...
24.
Was it 24?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I've watched it all the way through myself. Yeah. I watched it all the way. I was watching stuff as it was happening, and I rewatched all of it probably about a year ago, something like that. But I'd like to just talk about it for a bit, because if it's not too annoying,
it'd be great to talk to a fan of history,
right?
Quote unquote.
Because there it was. I mean, there's so much to say, but just if I give you a really, really. My understanding, really, really brief, super brief overview of it. And if you can sort of build that out a little bit, pad that out a little bit. It seems to me that there was one or two members of the faculty, particular members of the faculty, who were, I am happy to judge them as sort of, insane is too strong, but just an arch, sort of got a massive, the racial resentment. And they used some of the students as foot soldiers, and then the president and the sort of very, very senior leadership allowed it to play out, and it all in the end imploded into some sort of mass hysteria. Or that's not quite right, but some sort of nightmarish, bordering on nightmarish scenario. And got a tiny bit violent, but it didn't end up with any giant riots and loads of people getting killed or anything like that. But nearly got there, and the police had to get involved. And the whole thing was like a microcosm of all the nonsense we've had during the Biden administration or so. Is that a fair reading of basically how it went down?
Yeah. Well, this is another way that history is complex, and you can look at it, and some people. So one of the people that emerged from it and has been very successful in life post Evergreen was not not the institution itself,
right?
For sure, but it was Brett Weinstein,
right?
One T, Weinstein, not Weinstein.
Yeah.
And he went on to be part of that IDW thing, and then he's tackled other controversial issues like the response to COVID and certain novel medical interventions.
No, he's got a big podcast of his own.
He's got a very big podcast called Dark Horse.
Been on Joe Rogan or something.
Yeah, he's regularly on Rogan.
Sort of internet famous, or just famous.
Yeah, he's rather famous. He's recognized on the street
sure.
from what he tells me. But when somebody wants to make a hit piece about him, they'll tell the Evergreen story in a very particular way. And when somebody wants to make a hero out of him, they'll probably tell the Evergreen story a little bit closer to my way. But his part of the whole story was actually just one piece of it. And his major role...
When they confronted him outside his class that time.
Yeah, it wasn't even that. It was that he became the venue by way, or the modus, or the way in which the events went viral to a certain audience. So this was 2017. At that time, it was post-Gamergate. Gamergate, which is a part of this building right here, part of your project right here, is really part of what's going on now in a way. Gamergate led the way to a bunch of content creators, your boss among them, making these SJW cringe videos, you know, where these social justice warriors, usually on a college campus, were just acting badly, behaving badly. Fatty's acting badly or something like that, you know, the blue-haired freakazoids or whatever like that. So when Evergreen happened, the students recorded the whole thing and put it on the internet because they thought they were doing the righteous, just thing, because they had been taught that they are on the right side of history no matter what because of their skin color, because they're fighting against oppression. That would have gone really viral because it was so cringe. But because you had Brett Weinstein deciding to speak to Tucker, deciding to go on Rogan, go on Dave Rubin, and giving it a more intellectual answer to that, it led the people who were not what AA would call like people who just love slop, that SJ Devil cringe compilation. It was just slop. Yeah. But Brett gave it to an audience that was a little bit more, what the heck is going on? This is a bigger problem. And he kind of legitimized it in a way, or legitimized the critique by leading it to another audience. And I don't think he understood that that's what he was doing. I was there when it happened, and I was listening to professors trying to figure out how to respond to Brett, because Brett went on Tucker, and they thought that was totally wrong. He should have never left. He should have just accepted his fate as a racist Jewish supremacist, white supremacist Jew. He should have
hadn't done or said anything racist.
Yeah, he should have never let it out there. Yeah. And they were formulating a public response, this open letter public response, where they basically said that the students didn't do anything wrong. We need to rewrite the student code of conduct to make sure that they don't get in trouble. And Brett did everything wrong, and we need to rewrite our faculty handbook so that we can get him in trouble. And I remember being in the room while they were composing this document, because I was talking to one of the professors, and his wife was composing this document. I saw the document. I'm like, Brett's going to be on Rogan tomorrow. You don't want to release this right now. And they're like, we have to release this right now. I'm like, I don't think nobody understood the power of the internet. They had none of the teachers.
Even in 2017.
In 2017, the teachers and the administration had no idea the media frenzy they were about to be involved in. They thought it was just some viral videos and some stupid people on Fox calling it in. They had no idea that there's this huge network. And so what happened at Evergreen was it was a particular beat in our story that involves Trump, that involves Gamergate. It was a particular beat where people were still not aware of the power of social media, and still not aware that recording all this stuff and opening up to not just the slop hounds that are eating it as slop, but to the intellectual class who are worried about what is going on. And then also witnessing, and then my job, when it was time for me to step up, because I was really pissed off, I went there to get a degree. I went there and I thought that education meant something. And when I got there, I realized that no, it's just high school plus, and this is a fairyland of racial resentment. And they turned my entire degree into a racial justice degree, where I went in there.
Were you just finishing your undergrad?
I was just finishing. I started later. I took a while. It was a very cheap place to go.
Were you just finishing up when it all happened, right? Or you just finished the summer before, was it? Or?
I'd finished a few months before. Right, okay. I had like a capstone project, and I finished it, this huge freaking book. I finished it, and I'm like, well, what do I do now? And I'm like, well, I'll just do one more semester and then figure out what's next. Maybe go to grad school. Little did I know that the entire school system, somebody criticized me very recently for going to Evergreen College and not realizing that it was woke. But I'm like, every single college is woke. So no matter where you go, it's going to be woke. I mean, just a little bit less woke than Evergreen, but Harvard is, since George Floyd, it's all just as woke, if not more so.
Plus, on paper, Evergreen would have looked lovely.
Yeah, independent
on paper,
study.
It's like this is a paradise.
Yeah, it's basically master's level work for undergraduate prices. You get like a couple of teachers, then you go really deep, as deep as possible.
But I mean, like the campus and the surroundings.
Oh yeah,
that's lovely. That is idyllic. Gorgeous. To me. It looks like
it's a little brutalist.
You couldn't have known that it would have.
No.
The time you spent there, this towards the very end, descended into nonsense. You couldn't have known that.
No.
Right.
So Brett had a particular role, and you can call him a hero or a villain based on his response to that. But I think he served a particular function for the story. There's other things that he did for himself. But for the story, for the historical moment, he served it in a particular way. And my job was to take I worked in the media department while I was there. And I was on camera recording all of these workshops, seminars, and lectures of just basic Maoist revolutionaryism
Yeah.
and really cringe church services. You guys have to watch, if you watch nothing, watch the canoe meeting, where they worship the black person, and they start to worship the black people. I'm on camera the whole time, and so it's not just a bunch of students behaving badly. It's this entire institution implementing a particular ideology, intersectionality, critical theory, whatever you want to call it, which is a whole story that everybody's covered ad nauseum now. But to tie the students' behavior to the professors. And one key part of the documentary, one of the protesters, they go in, they take over this faculty meeting, and they start eating the cake that was for somebody who was retiring. And they say, aren't we doing what you taught us? You taught us to change on the Evergreen website. It says to change the world, and you taught us to do this. So why are you not going along with this? Why are you not storming the Bastille as well? Not that she knew what that would mean, but why are you not like rallying against us? And the thing is that nobody really knows. Like, the really frustrating part of the documentary, the students are really upset about something, and you never find out what they're actually upset about or what they actually want. They want free grades and gumbo, basically.
Right.
And they're mildly offended. And there are professors, to get back to your point, there were professors who were egging that on. But what happened was that when George Bridges, the president at the time, came in at 2015, he empowered. He said his first opening statement was that the history of racial justice is really great, but racism still controls everything in America right now. And why we're here at this college is to solve racism. And so he said that the purpose of the college was to end racism, and he empowered these hyper anti-racist teachers to take over the college. And so when the students saw that, well, we can Machiavelli, and they were all intuitively seeing that they could get infinite power by following these steps, the steps were already put in place by the doofus at the top. And so when he's agreeing with them during the struggle sessions, he's not just allowing it to go forward, he set it in motion. Right. And he wants it to go forward because this is how racism is solved, these struggle sessions, this white guilt thing. In a Vice documentary, and then I'll stop.
No.
Going on, but in the Vice documentary, the interviewer says, the students say that you're a white supremacist. Are you a white supremacist? And George Bridges, the president, says, no, well, depends on how you define that, So they were so indoctrinated in this all the way up and down. And I remember after that thing happened where they took over the campus and they had that struggle session, and I go back on campus to do my little thing, and I saw a black man walking across campus, and I physically got scared. It was the most racist thing I've ever felt. It's like, that man is a threat to me, based purely on his skin. And after feeling that, that's what got me really angry, because I don't think, everybody's a little racist. I'm pretty sure, that position, but they put me in that position to be viscerally hyper aware of racial tension. Yeah. And it was like, that was just totally inexcusable.
It's horrible, isn't it?
Totally inexcusable.
The way I go on screeds about the Pakistani community or something, it's like, I wasn't born that way.
Yeah.
I didn't ever think in those terms.
Yeah.
Until it was forced on you.
Yeah.
Right? What a horrible, what an evil thing.
Yeah.
So who was the female black member of staff who was...
Naima Lowe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a nexus, am I right? Is it fair to say that sort of a nexus between Bridges and her? Neither could have done it on their own. Right, I mean, the students, the foot soldiers, of course, big part of it, and something else. But you need both. You needed both the super or the president really to allow it to happen, and then the actual catalyst or the actual agitator to live it out and make it happen and become real.
Yeah, Naima Lowe worked in the media department too. And
do you speak to her quite?
I helped her out.
Do you have any sort of interaction with her?
We had one interaction. She was rather rude to me. She needed my help for technical. Her whole job was to teach how to use Final Cut Pro, and she didn't know how to use Final Cut Pro. She just like,
of course.
She didn't know how to do anything. I mean, her films are technically okay, but they worship ugliness, which is just really interesting.
Sure.
Because she's a postmodernist, and that's just what's in her heart. But one of the staff said, she teaches 16 credits in hate. Like the students go in.
It's
like
the classic example of an anti-racist who is in fact a massive racist.
Right. It's all about grievance.
Yeah.
I went to one of the showings earlier on, like my first quarter there. I went to one of the showings of her students to go and check out like the art that's happening on, because I wanted to be involved in the creative aspects of life. That's why I was there, to take time off of the real world and figure out how to possibly make a dent in artist career. So I went there, and they just talked about themselves the whole time. It was just fart huffing central, man. And Naima Lowe has a particular, and you can see this, just supreme resentment. Supreme resentment. Very interesting psychology. And when I did my first video, which I didn't even know what I was getting into. I'm just like, everybody thinks this is a bunch of students going wild, but there's a huge story here. So I started publishing videos. And when I got around to, I need to make a video about Naima, because I have all this footage of Naima giving all these lectures about power and racial resentment, and how you can't escape the fact that I'm a black woman in a white world, and how I fear for my life every time I step out of the door, which is not the case. Like there was a shooting.
It's lies. Let's call it what it is. Lies.
Yeah. Well, yeah. A lie that turns into like total psychosis because it's not based on truth. I mean, if she believed it, but there was a shooting a year before the protests where two young black drunk men assaulted a police officer with a skateboard. They ran after a police officer with the skateboard and got shot, and it's the police officer's fault, right? Because like, why are these black youths going around getting shot everywhere? It's like, well, don't assault a police officer with your skateboard. What are you telling you? I am armed. I'm going to fire if you do that. It's stupid. And then they ended up going to prison because they ended up fighting over a cell phone, those two brothers that did that thing. It's just, the whole thing's a train wreck. But Naima Lowe saw that, latched onto it. It's like, finally something that I can make my project.
That's disgusting. I mean, it's evil. It's just...
It's cringe upon cringe upon cringe upon cringe upon cringe.
But how much is that? Everything about Evergreen is sort of, in a bad, negative way, perfect.
Isn't beautiful? It's like this beautiful thing.
It's like, how many, again, throughout history, so many times where I think of something like, I don't know, maybe like the Jim Jones thing, or I think of the events that went down at, Dan Carlin did a great podcast about it, at Munster. In the 16th century, there was a very particular set of events went down in Munster. Something similar, a relatively small community that descends into madness and hell because 2 or 3 very, very key people make it happen.
Yeah.
Make it happen.
Yeah.
And all the events are manipulated and contrived to go down and down and down.
Yeah.
Thank God that Evergreen didn't end in sort of some terrible, terrible violence.
No, it wasn't. That's another
short of that,
really interesting thing, because I had to go through with all this really crappy footage and transcribe it. And there's this one extended, like 3 or 4 hour long struggle session where you have...
It's a perfect word as well for it, just briefly to say. They are struggle sessions.
No, they are.
It's exactly what
it's all
are.
Maoist. Yeah. And they had Robin DiAngelo come in and teach them how to do this. Which is no great stain on her illustrious character, but still, you watch them like a pack of hyenas, like taking nips. Like, why don't they? I was just wondering, why don't they cross the line? Why don't they cross the line? And I was asking somebody about this
because they never did they? They never actually turned into.
There was one kind of alteration, which was really silly, but like it was silly. It's you guys have to watch the documentary. It's just everything is so. Just like this comedy of terror, right? In this way.
Yeah.
But there, somebody was telling me about why they don't go violent, and he watched the footage too. And I think he was a biologist, and he talked about like some dog packs when the youth are like learning how to be violent together. They'll do that. They'll like go after like something and not quite get violent, but just like kind of tease each other and mimic violence. But they're not quite ready to be violent, and they know they can. And they already know that they can go as far as possible, as long as they don't cross that line, they're totally good. They can get away with anything. Because obviously that's just how the power structure was set up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just want to return to the point that when you see hit pieces on Brett, they will pin a lot of the responsibility of what happened on him. And he was not even, the protesters even said he was not the point of this thing. They just picked the wrong guy to pick on because he didn't think that the equity committee, which is there's got to be like some sort of like commissar term for it, like some sort of like this political body that then rules the entire corporation. He didn't think that the equity committee should be in charge of firing and hiring people. He didn't think that we should have these anti-racist statements in our yearly portfolio because that could be grounds to politically fire somebody because they weren't significantly anti-racist, right? That has nothing to do with, and he just stood up for that and he just like typed some letters that were very well-meaning. He was a super Bernie bro. He was super progressive. He was super duper progressive.
That's the irony, isn't it? That's something that's almost funny from someone looking out.
Yeah.
Who isn't even a leftist. It's almost funny.
Yeah.
Sorry, go.
That their own. So like when you say there are a few key peoples, he's a key person in turning it into what it turned into, like on a media level and allowing the sunlight in. But the actual thing that happened were a couple key students, a couple key faculty, and then George Bridges setting up the institution. And then actually you can't forget that this was 2017. Trump 1.0 just gets elected. Everybody on campus was really certain that concentration camps were going to be set up. That's how, and that is the fault of Hillary Clinton, her super PACs, and the media industrial complex, or the cathedral, whatever you want to call it, that is this very day paying the price for doing that. This is all a point. All I wanted to do was write books. All Carl wanted to do was play video games, and these people just couldn't leave us alone. So it's not enough. This is where I go right. It's not enough to be a libertarian because you're never going to be able to grill until you get that Chesterton's fence up and electrified now, right?
It's great. I think you described it brilliantly when you said it was a beat. It was a beat in the greater song of
contemporary
that's happened.
Yeah.
I would advise anyone who doesn't know to go back and watch those. They're in sort of the 24-part series you use in sort of 20-minute blocks. Yeah. It's very digestible, fascinating. Yeah. I think it's fascinating.
If you're hungering to return to like a cringe, like the high seas of cringe days, the leftists, unfortunately, after Trump won again, aren't supplying too many tears for us. Yeah. So if you want to revisit that point in history where things were totally unhinged,
feels like they are a bit burnt out now.
Yeah, this is when they still had a wad to blow, so to speak.
So a couple of last things before we wrap up, because I could chat to you for so many hours.
It's so great to be here with you, Bill.
I wanted to ask you. You've mentioned that in your opinion anyway, the constant kissing thing was not your finest work. I didn't think that at all. I never thought. But anyway, is there anything that sticks out in your mind as one of your favourite ones, or any interview or any bit of content you made that you thought was particularly good, or you were particularly happy with, or you very much enjoyed that conversation, or anything like, or any even topics? Like, are you sick of the gender stuff now, or are you like, does anything particularly stick out in your mind over the years of that was great, I really enjoyed that? Or
it's probably speaks to my excellent humble character that I don't have one on hand because I keep on thinking, well, what's next? There's a couple of key moments in the Detransition series where you get to this raw state of this kid who got subjected to some terrible treatment, and like recognizing that they're responsible for it, and just like seeing like, you know what, I always wanted love, and I never knew how to love myself. And that's what it is. And there's really like a hallmark moment, but when a human being is like really on that level of vulnerability, and it just feels like to be able to receive and to broadcast that level of humanity, I just feel so blessed and gifted to be able to facilitate that. And then I guess there's a couple of moments where, I'm on Twitter because I need content. So I hear of somebody, and before watching, maybe I'll like just listen to a 30-second clip. I'm like, yeah, they know how to speak. That's all I need. I need you to know how to speak. And there's something there. And I just reach out and I have them on, and then I totally forget who that person was. And I look them up like 20 minutes before. I'm like, oh, I have this person. What am I going to talk about? And I just get quiet. And I go through like an hour and a half and I'm just blown away. I have no idea what's going to happen in the interview. And afterwards I'm like, that was a good show. I just feel bigger or better for having met that person. I kind of like that.
No, that's great, isn't it?
That's something that that's why I'm not like one of the top tier interviewers on YouTube or anywhere. I don't do any prep. I don't want to. I could do prep, and it's partly because I'm lazy, and it's partly because I loved writing for the first half of my life. I loved writing, and the best part of writing was seeing that blank page and having no idea what was going to happen. And then the worst part is like having a marked up page that I have to then rewrite. And I had my biggest lesson that I learned at Evergreen was that you just have to rewrite and just go over and over and over and just really love that which you've made and make it better. Instead of shying away. It's like, it has to be perfect the first time. Like really understanding, like to really sink myself into something. But with the interviews, I love, because, like you had an idea when we walked in here, but if you were closed-minded that you only had that idea, and that's what I hate about interviews, certain interviewers, when I watch an interview, like they have an idea of what they want to talk about. And so they'll go, and somebody will say something and then they'll like, okay, next question. I hate that. I go a little too far. I have nothing there. And then it's just like, okay, let's see what happens. And just being wide open to them. I heard one more thing. I heard this is stuck in my head. It's another Hallmark thing. It's a quote. I don't know who it's from, but expectations are premeditated resentment. In a way. Interesting. And in the context of a marriage or a relationship, it's really something I'm trying to like really understand. But I think in little day-to-day things, like having an expectation, it leads to like a feeling of disappointment that wouldn't be there. But at the same time, it's kind of like my fault for not being as prepared. I could be a lot better professional if I was a little bit more prepared. But I think there's this balance that I'm playing around with. I like that raw, dirty, YouTube-y kind of just see what happens kind of spirit.
No, I absolutely think you do it great. I mean, that's sort of one, if I've got any sort of philosophy for interviewing people, it is simply to have a conversation. Yeah. Not to try and railroad them in any real way. Yeah. I've got an idea of how I want a conversation to go. That's what I do sometimes when I do my history theme content, quite often, at least in recent times, it's just me on my own monologuing, but often it's in a conversation with someone. And just make it a conversation. Yeah. Let it go wherever it's going to go. Yeah. That comes through in your stuff. Yeah. And I think that's great. Yeah, I hate it when they pose a question, wait for them to say until they've finished speaking, and then just go on to their next question. It's like, what? Just speak to the person. Just have an interaction with them. Yeah. That's always going to be better. Yeah. I think. But okay, so one last thing before we go. What is your sort of, have you got any sort of vision for the future or any sort of ideas of what you want to do next, or are you already doing that, or what can we really expect to see from you and your channel going forward? Yeah. What do you think?
I'm always falling off a cliff. I get to this point where I get to the point in my calendar where it just gets empty. I'm like, oh crap, I have nothing. And then I go on Twitter and I'm hungry. I'm hungry for something. Like when the plate's clean, then I get hungry. But then I'll stock it all up, and then I'll not want to, and then I'll get exhausted from talking to all these people. And then that empty calendar will come up, and then I get hungry again. So I'm really interested in. I have a love affair with. There's this writer named Mencius Moldbug or Curtis Yarvin, and I continually go back to his early work. He has this essay on like this huge 9-hour. Well, somebody turned it into an AI Orson Welles reading the whole thing, which is just hilarious to read Yarvin through Orson Welles' voice. But there's something in his early work that saw everything that happened at Evergreen, saw everything that happened with Trump, and with describing the power structure as it is. And he's been recently rather wrong about how to undo that. And Trump's coming in like a wrecking ball, but it seems like what Curtis was describing with regard to American power was really on point. And I think I think he's one of the most important thinkers or theoreticians, political thinkers right now. So he sparked this. His work led to a number of different other people reading him and then reading who he was reading, and
Right.
those are the people who I describe as the dissonant right. And they've gone in all these different directions. Like there's more Christian nationalists, more kind of race realist people, more people that are in the center, more kind of post-liberalists, which I think is probably the correct term for a lot of the people. The big, broad thing. James Lindsay, great friend, love him. I've had him on for hours and hours and hours. He describes them as woke right. I really disagree with that. But whatever he's talking about post-right, he means or woke right is post-liberal. So we're in a post-liberal moment, and there's this on the not left, let's say, there's a lot of discussion and there's a lot of ideas and there's a lot of energy there. I've done so much on the anti-woke stuff and I've done so much on the woke stuff that I'm looking for the positive vision. And I think the positive vision comes from the sparks between different personalities. And I think I'm uniquely positioned, and that's why I've tried to do this, to establish friendship with this group of people and to really capture their personalities because they're personality people and they run on charisma and intelligence. And so I just really want to continue to map out that domain. And there's probably some other things that I'm not aware of, but I am looking for the next thing. I think right now that's really salient with what's happening with Trump. But I don't know what the next theme will be. So I'm always open to where's something that where's the puck going? Like with the detransitioner stuff, I got ahead of that puck. And now it's pretty mainstream. People know about it. Focus on the Family did a film about them. PragerU did a film based on that. So it's basically, and I've gone through that. And I was ahead of the curve because I sensed something. I want to like be able to continue that. And maybe go into like kind of dangerous waters. But I think, look at Peterson hands. Peterson hands. I think if you follow your curiosity and you keep yourself clean in a way, you can sense signals that otherwise you couldn't perceive with your mind. So I'm really trying to just be open. Where's the next thing going to be? And I'm fine with a bunch of people coming in afterwards when the audience is ripe and reaping the rewards of the attention on that. I really want to be the forward guard on not the culture war, but of the culture growth, I guess.
Right.
Maybe.
That's interesting. I myself have started to think about, and will begin to start writing about post-Trump.
Yeah.
Because it's not that long, in the scheme of things, that's not that long away. No. When you get to sort of our age, 4 years isn't any time.
No, yeah.
4 years goes like that. Yeah. It's nothing. So looking forward, not as in looking forward, I can't wait, it's going to be great. I mean, looking forward to what happens post-Trump. What will that be? What might it look like? And so on. Yeah, no, fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I would love to have you on to talk about whatever historical personage or event you would want to, but also just to riff on your lay of the land. I mean, historically, there's got to be a historical lens that can be used to shore up our vision of the present, and then also if you're working on this, you have to have some sense of stability with regards to what you're talking about. Like if Trump's doing this here, there's these other structures that are going to be affected. So it'd be fun to riff on that when and if you're ready to do that.
No, absolutely. So. It could break one of two ways. It could just be the implosion and death of the Republic and civil war. Or it could be a new golden age. An absolute new, better than America, more successful in every metric than America's ever been thus far. A true hegemon of the earth for centuries to come, or a complete implosion. It could go either way. So, unfortunately, that's take us right up to the end of the time. We can't go much longer because of what our producers have to do before they can go home.
This is great.
Well, sorry, thank you very, very much for coming in.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure to meet you in person.
Yeah, absolutely.
An absolute honour and a pleasure. And I mean that really, really sincerely. And if and when you ever come back to good old Blighty, you must visit us again.
Absolutely.
And so thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Beau.
All right, and anyone out there, if you haven't already, subscribe to Benjamin A. Boyce.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's Calmversations on podcasts. So.
Conversation.
Calmversations.
Okay. Until next time, thank you very much. Take care.